The Beacon, celebrating when God uses the unexpected to do the unexplainable.
Hey, well, good morning and welcome to The Beacon. My name is Steve Woods. I am thankful to get to be your host, and together on the program with me again today, my faithful co-host, Jeff Blake of Phoenix Christian Preparatory School. Jeff, good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
Oh man, Jeff and audience, we have an incredible opportunity today. We have a guest that is in this lane of educational choice and freedom in America, and has relocated himself and his family for the purpose of being useful in that mission. And I'm just delighted to get to introduce and welcome Corey DeAngelis, who's the Director of School Choice for Reason Foundation. Corey, thank you so much for being on the program from Washington, D.C. this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're just really grateful, and it's amazing, what you're doing, the opportunity that you have to be a voice on behalf of educational freedom and choice for families and educating their students is incredible. And it's interesting to all of us, I think, as the greatest debate in all the land today is, well, are my kids going to go to school? Are they going to go to school but be at home? Am I going to educate them? Is it going to happen through Zoom meetings? What's going on? And so the ear of the country is now poised towards this topic, and something that you've been working on for some time, and we're excited to get to talk with you about that today. Again, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you again. Yeah, I'm really excited. And this is, you're right, a huge policy debate right now with schools, just saying that they're not going to reopen. I mean, 59% of the largest school districts in the United States most recently, from a recent survey, have said that they're not providing any in-person instruction when it comes to the public school system. We're seeing a different response from the private schools, and we can get into that a little later as to why there might be a difference in incentives across sectors.
It's an important and relevant conversation, and not just in a global pandemic, but really on the whole, as to what the marketplace should be like, what it should allow as it relates to education. Before we dive deep into that, let's get to know you just a little bit. Tell us a bit about your background, your education growing up, where you were in the country, how you ended up in Washington, D.C., and let's just let the listeners get a little vibe for who you are and how you got to be where you're at.
Yeah, I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. So although I live in the swamp, I'm not of the swamp. I'm here in D.C. just for work. But yeah, I attended government-run schools, or what you would know as traditional public schools, all throughout my K-12 educational experience, because my family didn't really have the means to pay for a private school tuition and fees. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to allow families to be able to have these options, because one, I didn't have a lot of these options growing up myself, but then also I got a little taste of school choice in high school. In my district in San Antonio, Texas, we had something called magnet schools, which are still government-run schools, but you're not residentially assigned to them. And so you can voluntarily select into these schools, and they'll accept you via lottery. And I saw at that particular school that it was just so much better and much a high quality education than the school that I was residentially assigned to. And I can't imagine the different life trajectory I would have been if I would have went to the school that I was residentially assigned to. It looks like there was, a lot of, gang activities going on at the school. When I'd walk through the hallways of that school, it seemed like there was not as much learning and there was more disorder in the classroom. And the reason I was able to see these two worlds at one time was because the magnet school that I attended was actually on the campus, physical campus of the school that I was supposed to go to. So it was like you can see the big difference in the worlds between those two school systems. And so I think everybody should have those types of options, within the public school system, but then it shouldn't stop there. The money should follow the child to wherever they're getting an education. And if that's in the private sector as well, people should have that option as well, because obviously with magnet schools and other public schools, they are prohibited from having a religious affiliation. And that's an obvious benefit that can be accrued to religious families in choosing private schools as well. So I think, there shouldn't be any discrimination on, the type of school that you're allowed to take your education dollars to. So that should be a charter, magnet, private. But then, after high school, I did my bachelor's and master's in economics at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And I studied under John Merrifield, who has done a lot of private school choice research. He studied a private school choice voucher program in San Antonio that's no longer in operation and studied the effects of that. And he's also affiliated with EdChoice, which is formerly known as the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, named after Milton and Rose Friedman.
Mm-hmm.
And as studying economics, I just kind of saw a lot of the problems with the education system in the United States that result from this residential assignment, leads to a lot of monopoly power. Just imagine if you were residentially assigned to your neighborhood grocery store, regardless of the quality of the products that they served you, and regardless of whether you actually chose to get your groceries from that residentially assigned grocery store. Imagine if they got to keep your money regardless of whether you actually shop there. And imagine if you had to pay out of pocket if you wanted to choose something else and essentially pay twice. So a lot of this monopoly power kind of in the public school system got me really interested in reforming the education system through school choice mechanisms by allowing the dollars to follow the child to wherever they get an education, public, private, home, or otherwise. And then after that, I did my PhD at the University of Arkansas under two big school choice researchers, Dr. Patrick Wolf and Dr. Jay Green, where one of my first studies at that program found that access to a private school voucher program in Milwaukee, one of the longest standing voucher programs in the United States, we were able to look at individual student level data, and we found large reductions in criminal activity. And part of that could be the moral education that is accessed through the private school sector, since private schools are more likely to be religious. That's not the only theory as to why this could be. It could also just be competitive pressures at civic, in public schools versus private schools, providing a good civic education and moral education to their children. But we found that, and we also found reductions in paternity suits, which are often created through out of wedlock births from that program. So I've seen a lot of positive effects in the data with these programs, and then also just the moral argument for school choice has really gotten me to research the effects of these programs, but then also to bust the myths that come from the other side that when special interests try to prevent families from being able to take their children's education dollars to whatever school works best for them. So that's kind of the quick background of how I got interested in this and kind of where I'm coming from. I really came big from the research side, and I still do the academic research, have almost 30 peer-reviewed publications on the topic of school choice in just a few years. But now I'm moving a lot towards, the advocacy side and just making the theoretical arguments as to why school choice is a good idea. And I really don't think there are any good arguments to prevent families from choosing the school environment that works best for their own children.
Yeah, the residential segmentation is just something that I just can't imagine you would find it in about any other area. And am I wrong to think that there's a sense of irony where, this government watchdog that doesn't allow monopolies in any other industry sort of protects the one that they have as it relates to education?
Yeah, I mean, you heard this during the Democratic presidential debates. They would rail against the pharmaceutical monopolies, and I'd say, okay, yeah, monopolies are bad, but now apply that to the public school system too. And you never hear them apply the same logic across sectors. For some reason, it's okay if it's a public monopoly or a government monopoly, but not a private monopoly. I would argue, as Milton Friedman argued historically, that private monopolies are not something that you want either, but they're better than a public monopoly because they're more likely to be replaced. You're not forced to pay for a private monopoly, and private monopolies have historically been more likely to be replaced than public monopolies because public monopolies, they get your money regardless of whether you even consume the service. So I would argue that if you see problems with private monopolies, you should also extend that logic to the public sector as well. And look, residential assignment leads to a lot of inequities in the public school system. A lot of people think that the public school system is some type of great equalizer, but it's the opposite. We have zip code determining children's futures. And if you can afford to live in a very fancy neighborhood that's residentially assigned to the best government-run school, you're just more likely to have a better life trajectory. And you can essentially buy your way into the better schools through a choice by mortgage, essentially. I know Arizona has some type of open enrollment processes out there, but it's still partially indicated by your zip code because you get a higher chance of getting into a school if you live in that particular neighborhood. So even though the other side will say, oh, we already do have public school choice, it's not actually completely the case because zip code still does determine to a sense the likelihood of you getting into a better school. So look, school choice in that scenario can lead to more equity in the school system, in that rich people already have school choice, and middle-class income people are more likely to have access to better public schools, and they're just more likely to be able to access private schools. We should allow lower-income individuals to access those choices for their families too, by allowing the education dollars to follow the child to wherever they're getting an education. That would lead to more equity in the school system, and I think that's something that a lot of people ignore when it comes to the school choice debate. And look, I also want to point out really quickly is there's a lot of programs that the other side that does not like K through 12 school choice actually supports when it comes to other industries like food stamps. The money follows the individual family, and the family can pick Walmart or Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. We don't residentially assign low-income families to government grocery stores and say, if you want to use your food stamps, you have to go to that particular store. No, we rightfully so give the money to people instead of institutions. And this is a whole other conversation as to why, as to whether we should, have funding for the food system or not. But if you're going to have it, it should go to people, not institutions. Same thing with the school system. With Pell Grants at the higher education level, the money goes to the individual student. You can pick a public or private provider. Same thing with pre-K programs. Pre-K programs, the money goes to families. You can pick a public or private provider of pre-K as well. And so a lot of the people that support choice when it comes to higher education and pre-kindergarten education, for some reason don't support it when it comes to the between years of K through 12, and that's logically inconsistent to me. And the only way that I can square it is that in the K through 12 system, there's a entrenched monopoly special interest of keeping the system how it is, because they get your money in the current system regardless of whether you use their services or not. Whereas in higher education and pre-K, the norm is that people can already choose where to send their dollars. So that's the difference in incentives.
1 minute.
Well, and if the logic were to hold true, then wouldn't that choice at higher education and at preschool led to the demise and the failure of those systems? I mean, it hasn't.
It hasn't. Yeah, I mean, the higher education system in the United States is world renowned, and everybody wants to come here for higher education. And we also do have more choice when it comes to higher education in the United States.
Yep.
And look, public schools get better in response to competition, right? If you can take your money elsewhere, one, they actually end up with more money per pupil left behind because they don't lose 100% of the funding. They only lose a percentage of it.
30 seconds.
But then also, when the government school system sees that they're going to lose some money from choice, they start to rethink how they restructure their schools, and they actually improve. And there's a meta-analysis published in 2019 that has found overwhelmingly that school choice competition improves.
Hey, we're welcoming Corey DeAngelis. Thanks, Corey, for the info. Come on back to our second segment. We'll talk more with Corey about educational freedom.
And you're clear.
The Beacon is presented by Phoenix Christian, a school celebrating excellence in education since 1949. Learn more at phoenixchristian.org.
Hey, well, welcome back to the Beacon today. If you just happen to be tuning in, we are thrilled to be welcoming on the program Corey DeAngelis. Corey is a director of the organization I buried in my notes. Help me out, Corey.
Educational Freedom Institute, and I'm also director of school choice at the Reason Foundation.
Thank you, man. Hey, so we were talking in the last segment, we were hitting some of the statistics as it relates to this whole conversation of educational freedom and choice. And man, you're just on the forefront of that think tank, and it's critical. It's important. You have a lot of information that I think other people either don't have or don't want to look at because they've made a decision. They're uninterested in change. And this is just a case where it's got to happen. There's got to be some conversation. There's got to be some rational discussion about what makes the most sense for the lives of these young people whose trajectory is affected by the decisions that are either made or, in worst cases, not made.
Yeah, and what makes the most sense is obviously funding the student rather than the institution, just like we do with just about any taxpayer-funded initiative, whether that comes to, food stamps, Pell Grants, pre-K programs, Medicaid, Section 8 housing. It goes to individuals. If we're going to have the taxpayer funding at all, it should go to individual families to be able to choose where to best educate their children. This is why, school choice is so important, that the education dollars are meant for educating children. Okay, well then give it to the children and their families and allow them to choose the school that works best for them. It shouldn't belong to an institution that's not serving the needs of those children. And look, the family should also be able to choose the public school system if they want. If the public school system is doing such a great job, they won't lose any students whatsoever when families are given the choice to take their money elsewhere. But the problem is, a lot of people in this that do not like school choice will try to make two arguments at the same time, which are not logically consistent to make at the same time. They'll say, on the one hand, the public school system is so great that we do not need school choice, that this is just something that's not necessary. Then at the same time, they'll say, oh, if we have school choice, that will demolish the public education system. Well, which one is it? If your public schools are doing such a great job, no one will leave and take their money to other schools. But I think the reality is they know that the private sector, just as it does in any other industry, does a better job in general than the government-run sector. And so I think that's why these arguments are made, and I think they kind of are conceding that they believe that families will choose something else when they're given the freedom to choose something else. So it's a kind of a concession that they know that they're not providing an adequate educational service to their students. But then also I want to point out, look, there's a lot of myths in the school choice debate. I have a co-edited volume that's already available on Amazon. It's co-edited with Cato Institute's Neil McCluskey. It's called School Choice Myths, Setting the Record Straight on Education Freedom. And we tackle, with other authors all across the United States, 12 of the biggest myths in the school choice debate. And they're just often repeated over and over and over again. We knock them down, hopefully once and for all, in this book in one place. And we use a lot of data to support our claims in every single chapter. Because look, there's theories on either side of the debate, and I don't think the theories against school choice are any good, but it's very helpful to provide actual data to support your theories as well. And we do that in every single chapter. And we don't cherry pick, we provide all the existing studies on each of these questions in order to show people this is what the evidence says on this particular topic. And we also show the most rigorous studies. So in the previous segment, I was talking about one of these myths, essentially, that people will say, oh, well, if you fund the students directly and allow them to leave, then the children who are quote unquote left behind in the public school system will be worse off in one way or the other. And they'll say that you're defunding the public schools. And to which I will respond, one, if you're doing a good job, no one will leave your school. But then two, you actually end up with more money per pupil in the public school system, because all those schools in the public sector are funded based on enrollment counts. They aren't completely funded based on enrollment counts. From what I've seen in the United States, the average state is about 20 to 40% of the funding, or 60 to 80% of the funding on the higher end is based on enrollment counts. So what does that mean? 20 to 40% of the funding stays in the public school system for children who are no longer there. Just imagine if I took my, if I had my food stamp program for my family and I moved from Walmart to Trader Joe's. Imagine if Walmart got to keep 20 to 40% of my food stamps each week, regardless of whether they provided me with any services. Walmart would be happy about that. I don't think that's how it should be set up, but regardless, that is how it is set up in the public school system. Similarly, the K through 12 public schools should be more than happy that they get to keep 20 to 40% of the revenues for children who are no longer there. So you're not defunding the public schools by doing this. If anything, they're financially benefiting on a per pupil basis. But then three, the money doesn't belong to the school system at all. It belongs to the children. It should be based on their decisions. But then four, this argument doesn't have any merit whatsoever, because if you look at, there's about 28 studies on this topic that look at the effects of school choice competition on the children who remain in the public school system. 26 of the 28 rigorous studies on this topic find statistically significant positive effects of school choice competition on the children who don't even use school choice. That means you benefit from school choice even if you don't even use the programs, because you benefit from those competitive pressures, because the government-run schools notice that they're losing some money and they have to up their game a little bit. And what they do is they actually get better for those children who remain in the public school system. The two remaining studies out of the 28 find no statistically significant differences overall. So there's literally no evidence when it comes to private school choice programs that overall, allowing people to choose harms children in the public school. There's just no evidence for that. And there's a 2019 meta-analysis published in Educational Policy, a peer-reviewed academic journal, a high-quality academic journal. They also compiled all of these stats together and found a statistically significant positive effect of school choice competition on the children who remain in the public school system. So the evidence is on the side of freedom here, but it's also the theories on the side of freedom as well. It does not. Let's just imagine the evidence was the opposite, that for some reason we saw the test scores get a little lower in the public schools because they had a negative competitive response to competition and they didn't do a good job. I would argue that's not a legitimate argument to prevent low-income families from choosing schools that work for their individual children. Your right to choose your children's education that works best for them should not hinge on the competitive response of the government school system. Regardless, the evidence is positive, but even if it was negative, you should not be able to trap low-income families in a school system that's not working for them based on the response of the government schools. That's just kind of like saying, you could think of a situation where people say, oh, Walmart customers could be worse off if you take your food stamps to Trader Joe's. Even if that were the case, that would not be a legitimate argument to infringe on my liberty to choose Trader Joe's for my family because of the negative competitive response in this scenario, this hypothetical of Walmart. That would be a totally, absolutely ridiculous argument to make, that my right to choose, and the reality is my right to choose my children's education does not hinge on the competitive response of a school system. It doesn't hinge on the competitive response of the school system for advantaged families. Why should it apply to low-income families only? So I think that's just a ridiculous argument to make, and it just fails when you look at the evidence and basic logic.
Well, it totally makes sense. And Corey, you're not only a really informed guy and a really intelligent guy, but you're a really passionate guy. And we enjoy hearing the perspective that you've gained and the research that you've done. And it's beneficial to all that have a chance to listen. When we come back in this next segment, we're going to connect all of that information with an educator, and we'll listen to Jeff and his perspective on what's happening in the classroom at a private school as a result of some of the limited opportunities that exist in the state of Arizona. So thank you for tuning in to 960 The Patriot, for listening to The Beacon. We're grateful to Corey for being here. Come on back to this next segment.
The Beacon is made possible by Phoenix Christian and listeners like you.
Hey, welcome back to The Beacon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Steve Woods, together with Corey DeAngelis, our guest for the day, and also Jeff Blake of Phoenix Christian Preparatory School, our sponsor. And guys, I want to have the two of you interact a little bit, because we're talking about all the reasons why this just makes sense from the research that Corey has done, has shared. School choice is just, it seems like a no-brainer, and yet it's an uphill climb in so many states across the country and on the federal level. And Jeff, you're living out at Phoenix Christian in an environment that simply, I would think, probably just couldn't exist in the fashion that it does today. Talk a little bit about that for the benefit of the listeners, and to give Corey a perspective on just how important school choice is for the families you serve.
You bet. It's an honor. And Corey, I want to thank you for being a policy thinker and a communicator, and getting it out in the open to inform those who are making decisions and trickling down and shaping the lives of students that I get to see every single day. And even just the last few days here at schools, we're preparing for opening on August 20th. There is a steady trickle of families walking into this office, new families that would never have the opportunity to be in a private Christian school like Phoenix Christian, are here because of proponents for school choice like yourself. And I want to emphasize what Steve is saying. Although our school boasts, this year in October, we'll celebrate our 71st birthday as a school, we are not who we were in 1949. And now we are proud to boast and celebrate that we are a school of no majority. We serve infants all the way through 12th grade. Well over half of our graduating class from last year are first generation college attending students. And in those 55 students who graduated in a small environment, those students earned nearly $3.6 million in scholarship to afford them an opportunity that would never be given to them. And because of work like you're doing and other advocates for school choice, lives are changed every day. And I want to just open up with that and give you a chance to respond to those kind of numbers.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think that's what I'm seeing in my research when it comes to private school choice programs and even charter schools, that if you look at the meta-analyses on these, they typically lead to a much higher educational attainment, and that is through college enrollment and graduation from college. There's also 6 studies linking charter schools or private school choice programs to crime, and all 6 are peer-reviewed, finding large reductions in criminal activity after being exposed to these kinds of alternatives. And I think it has a lot to do with the better access to education that these children are getting. And I totally agree that expanding education choice programs like the ones in Arizona would be an equalizer. It would allow more children from disadvantaged backgrounds and from all backgrounds really to get a better education and to drastically change their life trajectory as we're seeing in the data.
So let me ask you, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, Jeff, give us an idea as a percentage, how many of the students that attend Phoenix Christian are there with some sort of assistance through a school choice scholarship?
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Somewhere, to be honest with you, somewhere in the upper 80%, close to 90% of our students are on some form of financial assistance through tuition tax credit programs, or what we call here in the state of Arizona, the Empowerment Scholarship. Many of our special needs students are funded through the Empowerment Scholarship, which allows parents to transition funding from the public sector here. In turn, that enables us to hire individual aides to walk with those students in several cases, one-on-one aides. That enables us to serve populations such as autistic students who are mainstreamed in our classrooms, who walk with a one-on-one aide, helping them thrive. It's a unique environment. And again, it's the blessing of a smaller school environment that allows for individualized education, personalized education. It's amazing.
Yeah, I will say that matches the national data that have been done on this and other programs. Looking at the most rigorous studies, I haven't seen any negative effects on educational attainment, and most of these studies are positive on educational attainment. And look, it doesn't surprise me all that much, because families are voluntarily selecting your school system and other private schools around the country because they see that kind of benefit, right? They want best for their own children. They have the best information about what their children needs, and they're seeing that your school system is providing that. And so, I think parents in general have the best, best in mind for what their children needs, and they have the best incentive to get it right. They have much better incentive to get it right than a bureaucrat in Washington, hundreds of miles away.
So Corey and Jeff, we're talking about one of the most critical decisions that can be made on behalf of the next generation of people in our societies. Kids are not able to make these directional decisions at an early age for themselves, and we can make a better life for them. And it's important to have these conversations and to make good decisions along the way. So listeners, as you've tuned in, you've picked a great program to listen to today. Thrilled to have Corey DeAngelis and Jeff Blake with me on the program. And we come back for our fourth and final segment. We're going to kind of try and put this in a place where you can grab it, get a hold of it, and spread the word. So thanks for tuning into The Beacon. Join us in a fourth and final segment coming up next.
Phoenix Christian believes strongly in its rich history and bright future, now equipping students from pre-K through 12th grade. Learn how you can help continue its legacy of Christ-centered education at phoenixchristian.org/support. You're listening to The Beacon, presented by Phoenix Christian.
All right, well, hey, welcome back to The Beacon, aired in Phoenix on 960 The Patriot, available through all of the common podcast opportunities that are afforded you. Again, today we have in the program Corey DeAngelis, who is the Director of School Choice for Reason Foundation. And in addition to that, Corey is in high demand because of his expertise in this area of school choice and educational freedom. You may have caught him, or might again soon, on one of the news networks. You might see him on an interview that he's about to do with Rand Paul when he finishes with us today. In addition to that, he has 2 weekly podcasts. Corey, tell us and the listeners where we can find more information from you and listen to other statistics and information as it relates to this topic and others.
Yeah, if you're not following me on Twitter already, I do share a lot of stuff on Twitter, including my weekly podcast. So it's just my last name, then my first name, @DeAngelis Corey. But if you want to look up my other podcast, there's one called the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. And so you can find that on pretty much any podcast platform. And we have a YouTube channel. And then also I do a weekly podcast with in conjunction with Bob Bowden from Choice Media called Random Assignment. So you can check out that on a lot of different podcast outlets as well.
And I actually caught earlier today, before we were on the air together, the Random Assignments, one of those with Bob, and it was super entertaining, really informative, and you guys just do a great job with that. It's really, really done well, and I would encourage the listeners to check that out, because if they're interested in what we're talking about today, they're going to be really interested in what you guys cover. So Jeff, again, having Corey here and talking in that last segment about the real life impact, just tell the listeners again, if you would, or ask Corey from your perspective, what you think might be important for listeners to hear.
Well, yeah. Again, worked a little late last night. Sat out on the stadium and watched the boys practice their football. When the sun went down, a little cooler out there. I'm looking at an army of young men. As we affirmed earlier in the program, Phoenix Christian boasts to be a school of no majority, and a beautiful tapestry of students out there under the tutelage of some coaches that care very much about them. Lives are being changed. I think, Corey, I think a question that's been driving in my heart this entire conversation is, many families, higher income, are aware of opportunities for school choice. Lower income families are not. I think what I struggle with every day is how to get the word out. When I watch a lower income family walk through this office, their eyes are wide open. They're excited for the opportunity. They can see new horizons for their student. My challenge is, how do we get the word out to lower income families about this? And what are the thinkers saying? What is your input for that?
Yeah, I mean, one obvious way to do it that I've been trying to do is social media, because everybody from all different types of income, backgrounds has access to, social media. So I do a lot of Twitter stuff, and a lot of my posts blow up, and I think families are learning about it more that way. And then also, I think families are doing it spontaneously, almost in reaction to the school system not providing what they need. Particularly this year, a lot of schools are either protesting really hard to not reopen, or they've already announced that they're not going to reopen. I think Kathy Hoffman in the public school system in Arizona already announced that even though they had already said August 17th was going to be the start date, they're pushing that back further as well. I think Chandler Unified also just recently said they're not opening until October, the second term. So I think families are already kind of seeking this out. But then also, yeah, I think social media is a good tool. And then also these podcasts that we do and others do, and radio stations. But look, I mean, maybe another way to do it is to have the school districts themselves provide this information to the families. The problem is an issue of incentives there, right? They probably don't want to advertise to their customers about their competition. And so I think that's why you might get pushback if you try to push for having the school districts themselves provide this information to families. You'd think if they were confident in their product, they'd be more than happy to share these options with their students. And I think we should put that on them and challenge the school districts to provide this information too. So that's my quick take on that. But look, you pointed out, we pointed out a lot of the benefits of getting access to a private school in Arizona and elsewhere. And a lot of the times the conversations around educational attainment and college enrollment, but I also want to point out there's other non-academic benefits to school choice too. And families over and over again, when you ask them why they choose a private school for their children, is one, the moral education through religion, which they cannot get in the public school system as well. But then also, the safety of their students. They want to get away from these unsafe situations in the government school system. You see a lot of reports of bullying happening in the school system, whereas the private school sector has been better at being able to adapt and be more nimble. And then also, yeah, with the schools just not even reopening in Arizona, that's just another benefit that shows that the private sector can adapt faster to things that are happening on the ground. So. But yeah, I mean, the main point is that there are non-academic benefits to choice too that so many of us just take for granted growing up. If you grew up in a high quality public school, or if you grew up in a public school that was not dangerous, you don't even think about all of these other non-academic benefits.
That's good.
Well, Corey, again, we're so grateful to have had you on the program today. And before we turn you loose to go on to other commitments that you have, can you give maybe a final appeal or some perspective that would allow somebody listening today who's like, man, I've just heard things I hadn't thought of before, and I'm motivated on behalf of my family or my grandkids or whomever to make a difference and to champion this cause? What action can they take? How can we as a society make a difference in this scenario?
Well, one is to publicly support expanding the school choice programs you already have in play in Arizona. I think they're mostly limited to students with special needs, but every student is unique and has a special need of their own. So that should be kind of open to everyone in your state. And that's one way to do it. But then also you can go through the courts as well. ACLJ has already gotten tons of legal inquiries from families in Arizona who are demanding their money back from the government because the Arizona Constitution requires a free public education. in some cases in Mesa, Gilbert, and Cave Creek Unified School District, they're actually charging families out of pocket. So they can't really say that's a free public education for these daycare services in August, when otherwise it would be free any other year. So I think they're taking legal action already with Gilbert Public Schools, for example. And then also another way is the families are demanding their money back if their schools don't adequately reopen for their children. Families need to get back to work, and this is a perfect time to expand school choice, because families are realizing that the school system shouldn't get the money for not educating my children adequately. That should follow my child to wherever they can get a good education, including a private school.
Well, as we talked about off the air, our program, Corey, has this tagline of how, when God uses the unexpected to do the unexplainable. Nobody expected a global pandemic, but here we are. And one of the things that we're seeing, both on the federal level and the local state level in Arizona, is the winds of change as it relates to the ESA type programs, where those dollars that have been very tightly restricted but can follow certain students. Hey, there's a call right now to say, hey, open that up, even if it's temporary. Open it up until things really are at a position where that product is still available and the Walmart isn't closed and I can go get the food that I'm geographically limited to get. When that happens, let's talk about it again. But until then, let me have the dollars so that I can take care of my family and my kids.
Yeah, if a Walmart doesn't reopen, you could take your money elsewhere. If a school doesn't reopen, you should similarly be able to take your money elsewhere. And that's the same with Pell Grants. If your community college doesn't reopen, you can take your Pell Grant elsewhere. You should be able to do the same thing with K-12 education. And I think people are understanding that.
Well, you're an intelligent, articulate, and well-informed voice in this subject matter, and we're really grateful to have had you on the program. Thank you for investing the time with us today. We wish you well, and we look forward to the next time our paths cross. Thank you, Corey, for being on the program.
Thank you guys so much. I look forward to staying in touch and perhaps coming on again with you guys in the future.
Don't tease us. We'd love to have you back.
Well, have a good one.
All right. Thank you, Corey. And Jeff, as we continue to kind of wrap up this last segment, it's been really, really informational. Here's a guy who's on the forefront of this important topic. And isn't it encouraging to know from your desk, from your position, as you struggle every day to collect enough resources to take care of the opportunities that are before you, that there's somebody like Corey and others that are out there to champion this cause, to be a voice in places with decision makers. As he's off the air with us now, he's jumping on a call to interview Rand Paul, who's in the process of introducing some new legislation on this subject. And man, isn't it encouraging?
Yeah, it is. And this is the time of year normally when we're ramping up, and in a normal environment, actually, as we record today, it would have been the original day for our students to have returned to school. But we pushed it back a few days in honor of what Governor Ducey has encouraged us to do. But as I've worked with the faculty who are back now for professional development, I see an army of foot soldiers ready to impact lives. And just on behalf of the entire organization, from the board to the teachers, the faculty and staff, just to express our gratitude for thinkers like Corey, what they're doing, affecting policy, the data to back it up. It is a data-driven element that we're grateful that there's people like that have the time, the resources, the energy, the gifts to pursue it, to get it out in front of our policymakers and to affirm what we see happening, but they can statistically, even better than we can, prove it, although we can prove it with some very strong test scores that we're proud to celebrate.
Well, that's for sure. And, boy, what a season like none other. As you go into this school year, so much debate, so much uncertainty. And yet here's what we know, right? We're going back to class. We're going back to school. And I think Phoenix Christian has found that balance of saying, hey, here's what we're about. Here's what we're committed to. And we are not going to be foolish. We're going to be prudent, but we're also not going to be paranoid.
That's exactly right. I really appreciate that. And again, I want to affirm that as we made our decisions, as we calibrated, we carefully interviewed and surveyed our families, and then sat down in a room for an hour to 2 hours a day and navigated through the data to make our decision. So here's what we've decided to do, is that we're going to begin on August 20th, again, to honor what Governor Ducey's encouraged us to do. We're going to start about 7:45 in the morning and run till about a little after 11 for session A. Take about a 45-minute to an hour break, and then begin session 2. Parents have the opportunity to choose either a morning session or an afternoon session. What we're really encouraged by is that those class sizes are going to be, in each class, all the way kindergarten through 12th grade, are going to be about 10 students in size. A number of our families have chosen an option we've provided called home-based learning. And we're going to drive that through Microsoft Teams with videos, a live stream of class, assignments that are handed out digitally to the in-class students and the home-based student. We have given our families those options. In addition, one of the things we discovered in our survey is a number of our families have either a single parent home or both parents need to work and need to go back to work to support the family. So we have also provided an environment in which students can come and stay the full day with us, again, in smaller environments. We're doing temperature checks and health screenings and keeping a very careful eye on our students, social distancing, all of it. But it is a service that we're providing to our families based on the data that they've given us. And we are blessed and honored to do that in an environment where we set Jesus Christ loose in an educational environment and see lives changed. And honestly, I'm particularly excited for the individualized attention we're going to be able to give our students at the beginning of the year to pick up some lost ground as we all made the transition last March to distance learning.
Well, it's encouraging. And Jeff, you know, directly to you, to anyone who might be listening in to this episode at this time and is within the hearing, who is on the front lines of making those adjustments, it's a big undertaking to bring students onto a campus in a very normal, traditional setting and accommodate their needs and their energy and equip them for a bright future. It's altogether something different and additional to take on that same task, added with the variety of adjustments that you've just outlined. So please feel the appreciation, not just of those of us who have kids and grandkids there, but of the community at large. And you know, those parents that are able to go back to work because of the bold effort that you and your staff are making, their lives are impacted as well. So for other educators that are listening, that are going back to work and back to school and taking care of these kiddos, we want to encourage you. We want to thank you. For the listeners that tune into the Beacon, thank you for listening to the program. We're honored that you listen. We hope you'll catch other episodes via the delivery system of your podcast. Have a great day and celebrate with us the ways in which God uses the unexpected to do the unexplainable for His glory and for the good of all of us who follow and love Him. Have a great day.